The May sunshine poured over Columbia University's sprawling lawn, as thousands of folding chairs stood in perfect rows, filled with proud families awaiting the class of 2015. Among them sat Anna Mitchell, a woman of 32, with chestnut hair and eyes that had seen too much sorrow for someone her age. She adjusted the program in her lap, a courtesy gesture for her colleague whose daughter was graduating today. The breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and new beginnings, but for Anna, spring always brought back memories she'd rather forget. 19 years earlier, on a similar May evening in 1996, her 17-year-old brother Michael had walked out their family's Brooklyn brownstone to meet friends and never returned. The last image Anna had of him was his tall frame silhouetted in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, promising he'd be back before midnight. He was wearing his favorite blue baseball cap, the one with the frayed brim their father had given him. Anna was only 13 then, too young to understand that sometimes people simply vanish, leaving behind half-empty coffee mugs and dresser drawers still full of clothes. That night had started like any other. Their mother was preparing a lasagna for dinner, the rich aroma of tomato sauce and herbs filling the kitchen. Their father was repairing a leaky faucet in the bathroom, muttering under his breath about needing better tools. Michael had been on the phone with his friend Chris, planning to meet up at the basketball court 6 blocks away. Anna remembered teasing him about a girl in his class, Eliza Winters, who everyone knew had a crush on him. Michael had blushed, ruffled her hair, and told her to mind her own business. Such an ordinary moment, yet it became precious in its finality. The ceremony began with the traditional pomp and circumstance, as faculty members in their academic regalia led the procession of graduates across the lawn. Anna applauded politely, her mind drifting between the present moment and fragments of the past. The searches that had consumed their family, the posters with Michael's face plastered across neighborhoods, the detective who eventually stopped calling with updates. The way her parents' marriage crumbled under the weight of uncertainty and blame. She remembered the first week after Michael's disappearance, how their living room had transformed into a command center. Neighbors brought casseroles that went uneaten. Her father's construction crew took days off work to join the search parties. Her mother answered the same questions from police officers over and over, her voice growing hoarser with each retelling. Anna had sat on the stairs, listening to the adults discuss possibilities that grew increasingly dark. Runaway, abduction, accident, worse. No one had noticed her there, absorbing every terrible scenario. "Isn't this wonderful?" whispered Diane, her colleague, misinterpreting Anna's wistful expression for emotion about the ceremony. "My Sarah worked so hard for this day." Anna nodded, forcing a smile. "It's beautiful," she agreed, though beauty had become a complicated concept for her over the years. After Michael's disappearance, she had learned to navigate the strange territory of continuing to live while someone you love is suspended in the limbo of the missing. She had finished high school, graduated college, built a career as a social worker helping families in crisis, all while carrying the hollow space her brother's absence had carved inside her. She'd chosen social work deliberately, though few people knew the connection. In her senior year of high school, her guidance counselor had recommended psychology, noticing Anna's intuitive understanding of grief and trauma. But Anna had wanted something more direct, more active. She wanted to be the person who showed up, who stayed when others drifted away, the person her family hadn't had when the initial shock of Michael's disappearance wore off and the world expected them to move on. The university president took the podium, his voice booming across the lawn as he welcomed the families and praised the graduating class. Anna's attention wandered to the sea of faces surrounding her, parents dabbing at proud tears, siblings fidgeting in uncomfortable formal wear, grandparents beaming at the continuation of legacy. It was during this sweeping observation that her gaze snagged on a figure standing near the back of the seating area. A man in his late 30s, with dark hair graying slightly at the temples, stood with his hands in the pockets of a navy blazer. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, just another attendee, except for the way he held himself, with a slight lean to the right, a posture Anna recognized from somewhere deep in her memory. When he turned his head to speak to someone beside him, his profile became visible, and Anna felt the world around her collapse into a pinpoint of impossible recognition. The crooked smile, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his eyebrows drew together when he concentrated. These were features she had memorized from family photographs, features she had described to countless detectives and search volunteers, features that belonged to her brother Michael. The man's features mirrored the age-progressed image a forensic artist had created for the 10th anniversary of Michael's disappearance. Anna had that image saved on her phone, had studied it so often that sometimes she forgot which version of her brother was real and which was a scientific approximation. But this man wasn't a computer simulation or an artist's guess. He was flesh and blood, standing less than 50 yards away. Anna gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles whitening. Diane glanced at her with concern, but Anna couldn't find her voice to explain. The man, could it really be Michael, was now clapping as the valedictorian took the stage. Anna stood up abruptly, mumbling an excuse to Diane, and began making her way through the row of seated guests, her legs trembling beneath her. By the time she reached the aisle, the man was moving, weaving through the crowd toward the refreshment table set up at the edge of the lawn. Anna followed, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. 19 years of imagined reunions had never prepared her for this moment. The possibility that her brother had been alive all this time, living a life parallel to her own. "Michael!" she called out when she was within earshot, her voice barely audible above the ceremony's ongoing speeches. The man didn't turn. Anna quickened her pace, dodging between clusters of standing guests. "Michael Mitchell," she tried again, louder this time. The man stopped and slowly turned around. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable, the same piercing blue eyes that had stared back at her from missing person flyers for nearly 2 decades. But there was something else in them now, something guarded and hollow that Anna didn't recognize. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice deeper than the teenage version she remembered, but with the same slight New York accent that had colored their childhood. "It's me," Anna said, her vision blurring with tears. "It's Anna, your sister." The man's expression shifted, a flash of recognition quickly replaced by alarm. He glanced around nervously, as though checking for witnesses to this encounter. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he said, his voice steady but strained. "My name is James Collins." But Anna knew. Despite the different name, despite the years that had redrawn the contours of his face, despite the careful way he was now backing away from her, she knew this was her brother. The birthmark just below his right ear, partially hidden by his collar, but visible when he turned his head. The small scar on his left hand from when he'd fallen off his bike at 10 years old. These weren't coincidences. She had memorized every distinguishing mark on her brother's body during those first frantic days after his disappearance. The small mole on his right shoulder blade, the slight overbite that their parents couldn't afford to fix with braces, the way his left ear was just a fraction smaller than his right, a detail so subtle that even their mother hadn't noticed until Anna pointed it out to the forensic sketch artist. "Please," Anna said, stepping closer. "I don't understand what's happening, but I've been looking for you for 19 years. Mom died still wondering what happened to you. Dad," her voice broke, "Dad's in a care facility now. Early onset Alzheimer's. Sometimes he still asks if there's been any news about you." Their mother had passed away 5 years earlier, breast cancer that had progressed too quickly for treatment to be effective. Anna often wondered if the constant stress of not knowing Michael's fate had contributed to her illness. The doctor said no, but Anna had seen how her mother's hope had calcified into a brittle shell over the years, how she'd kept Michael's room untouched, like a museum to her missing child. Something flickered across the man's face. Pain, perhaps, or guilt. For a moment, Anna thought he might acknowledge the truth, but instead, he shook his head firmly. "I'm sorry for whatever happened to your brother, but I'm not him. I need to go. My goddaughter is graduating today." Before Anna could respond, a young woman in a graduation gown approached, her tassels swinging as she threw her arms around the man Anna knew was her brother. "Uncle James, can you believe it? I actually made it." "Never doubted you for a second, Lily," he replied, his eyes deliberately avoiding Anna's stunned gaze. "Your mom and dad are looking for you. Something about family photos before the reception." As the young woman tugged him away, he finally looked back at Anna, his expression unreadable. "I hope you find peace," he said quietly, then allowed himself to be pulled into the crowd. Anna stood frozen, watching as the brother she had mourned for nearly 2 decades disappeared once again. But this time, she knew he was alive. This time she had a name, James Collins, and a connection to a graduating student named Lily. It wasn't much, but after 19 years of nothing, it was everything. The days following the graduation ceremony passed in a blur of sleepless nights and frantic research. Anna took a week off work, converting her living room into an investigation headquarters with a determination that alarmed her friends. Her apartment in Astoria, a space she'd decorated minimally, never quite settling in despite living there for 8 years, became cluttered with printouts and notes. Her laptop became a portal into the life of James Collins, a man who, according to all official records, had existed only since 1997, the year after Michael disappeared. She found his LinkedIn profile first. Architectural consultant with a firm in Boston, graduate of Illinois Institute of Technology, previously employed by 3 different firms across Chicago and Boston. No education listed before community college in Chicago, beginning in 1998. The timeline fit perfectly. Michael would have been 19 then, old enough to have established some kind of new identity. Through social media and public records, Anna pieced together fragments of his current life. James Collins worked as an architectural consultant in Boston. He had no spouse or children of his own, but was close to his goddaughter Lily and her parents, Thomas and Rebecca Wilson. There were photos of him at Lily's high school graduation, at holiday gatherings, on a fishing trip with Thomas, all depicting a normal, integrated life that gave no hint of a previous existence as Michael Mitchell. Anna studied these photos obsessively, looking for the brother she remembered in this stranger's face. In one image, James stood on a boat, squinting into the sun with the same expression Michael used to make when their father took family photos at the beach. In another, he was building a sandcastle with a much younger Lily, his concentration as he crafted a tower reminiscent of how he used to help Anna with her science fair projects. But there were gaps in his history that Anna couldn't ignore. No high school yearbook photos, no childhood friends commenting on his posts. His earliest digital footprints appeared when he would have been in his early 20s, with nothing to suggest a life before that. Anna reached out to old contacts. The detective who had initially handled Michael's case, now retired, a journalist who had covered the story for a local paper, even Chris and Danny, the friends Michael had supposedly been meeting the night he disappeared. None had new information, but all were startled by Anna's certainty that she'd found her brother alive. "Be careful, Anna," the retired detective had warned. "I've seen family members convince themselves of sightings before. The mind sees what the heart wants to believe." But Anna wasn't just seeing, she was investigating. She compiled a dossier comparing Michael's known features with James Collins' appearance. She traced property records, finding that James had purchased his Boston home 5 years earlier with a substantial down payment. She discovered he volunteered regularly at a youth center teaching architectural drawing to teenagers, that he had a reputation as a reliable but private person, that he'd never married despite a few relationships mentioned in passing on social media. On the 5th day of her investigation, Anna found herself parked outside a modest brick home in a suburb of Boston, watching as James Collins, her brother Michael, unloaded groceries from his car. She had driven the 4 hours from New York that morning, propelled by a mixture of desperation and hope. with no clear plan beyond confronting him again, this time away from the crowd and confusion of the graduation. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined streets with well-maintained homes built in the 1960s. It was the kind of place their parents had always dreamed of moving to, away from the noise and cramped quarters of Brooklyn. Anna wondered if Michael had chosen it for that reason, if some part of him had been trying to create the future their family had planned before everything shattered. As he closed his car trunk, Anna stepped out of her vehicle. He noticed her immediately, his body tensing as recognition dawned. For a long moment they stared at each other across the quiet street, the grocery bag still clutched in his hands. "How did you find me?" he finally asked, his voice low and resigned. "The internet makes it hard to hide," Anna replied, approaching slowly as though he might bolt if she moved too quickly. "Especially when your goddaughter tags you in every major life event." Michael, or James, as he now called himself, looked down at the bags in his hands, then back at Anna. "You should go," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice than at the graduation. "There's nothing for you here. Nothing except my brother," Anna countered, stopping a few feet away from him. "The brother whose room I kept exactly as he left it until I was 25. The brother whose disappearance destroyed our family. The brother I never stopped looking for, even when everyone else gave up hope." She didn't mention the birthday candles she still lit for him every year, or the missing persons organizations she volunteered with, or the support group for families of the missing that she'd attended every month for 15 years. She didn't tell him about the dreams where she found him, only to wake up reaching for a phantom presence. Something in her words seemed to reach him. His shoulders slumped slightly, and after a moment of internal struggle visible on his face, he nodded toward the house. "Come inside," he said. "Not for long, but we can talk." The interior of Michael's home was minimally furnished but comfortable, with clean lines and few personal touches. The residence of someone who had practiced the art of not leaving too much of himself behind. He placed the groceries on the kitchen counter and offered Anna water, which she declined. They sat across from each other at a small dining table, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Anna noticed a few architectural models displayed on shelves, intricate miniature buildings created with obvious skill and care. On the wall hung a single family photo, Michael with the Wilsons, at what appeared to be a Christmas gathering. No childhood mementos, no items that predated his life as James Collins. It was as though Michael Mitchell had been completely erased, existing only in Anna's memory, and the missing person flyers that had yellowed with age. "I don't know where to begin," Anna said, studying the face that had haunted her dreams for nearly 2 decades. "Why did you leave? Why did you never come back? Do you have any idea what it did to us, not knowing if you were dead or alive?" Michael, James, ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar to Anna that it made her heart ache. "I didn't plan to disappear," he said finally. "Not at first. It just happened, and then it became impossible to undo." "What happened that night?" Anna pressed, leaning forward. "You said you were meeting friends. Was that true?" He nodded, his gaze fixed on the table between them. "I was meeting Chris and Danny at the basketball courts, but on the way, I saw something I shouldn't have seen." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. 2 police officers beating a man in an alley. I recognized one of them, Officer Brennan. He'd coached our youth basketball team for years. And Anna remembered Officer Brennan, a fixture in their neighborhood, respected and well-liked. He'd organized fundraisers for the community center, had attended their church, had even dated their mother's friend Sylvia for a while. The idea of him being involved in anything corrupt seemed almost laughable. "I don't understand," she said. "Why didn't you report it?" Michael gave a bitter laugh. "I did try to report it. I went straight to the precinct. But the desk sergeant was Brennan's partner's brother. They took me into a back room, told me I was mistaken about what I'd seen. When I insisted, they said they could make things very difficult for me and our family. They mentioned Dad's construction business, how it relied on city contracts. Anna remembered their father's business, Mitchell Construction, a small but growing company that had just landed its first major contracts with the city around the time Michael disappeared. Her father had been so proud, finally moving beyond residential renovations to more lucrative commercial work. "So you ran?" Anna asked, trying to reconcile this version of events with the brother she remembered. Stubborn, principled, never one to back down from confrontation. "Not immediately," Michael said, his voice dropping lower. "I went home that night, terrified, but determined to figure out what to do. I told myself I'd talk to Dad in the morning, that we'd handle it together. But around midnight, a patrol car parked outside our house. It sat there until dawn. The next night, the same thing. Then Brennan himself came by the house, asking Mum if I was around, saying he wanted to talk to me about basketball coaching opportunities. His eyes—" Michael shook his head. There was a message in them, clear as day. Anna remembered that visit, though she hadn't thought about it in years. Officer Brennan had seemed so normal, so concerned when Michael didn't come home. He'd been one of the first to help organize search parties when Michael was reported missing. She recalled how he'd put his arm around their mother's shoulders, promising to do everything possible to find her son. "I packed a bag and left the next day," Michael continued. "Took a bus to Philadelphia, then another to Chicago. I worked odd jobs, stayed off the grid. I was 17 with no high school diploma, terrified that if I contacted anyone from home, I'd be putting all of you in danger." He described those early months in painful detail, sleeping in shelters, washing dishes in restaurant kitchens for cash, constantly looking over his shoulder. He'd changed his appearance immediately, cutting his hair short, dyeing it blonde, wearing thrift store clothes nothing like his usual style. He'd practiced speaking without his New York accent, created a backstory about being from a small town in Wisconsin. "For 19 years, Anna challenged, anger finally breaking through her shock. "You let us believe you were dead for 19 years because of a threat that might not even have been real." Michael's eyes flashed with a glimpse of the old intensity she remembered. "It was real. 6 months after I left, that man from the alley, the one they were beating, was found dead in his apartment. Apparent suicide, according to the newspaper article I found in the library. But I knew better." He stood up abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. "By then, I'd already become someone else. James Collins was born when I met Thomas Wilson in a construction job in Chicago. He took me under his wing, helped me get my GED, encouraged me to go to community college. I started studying architecture. Built a life." Thomas Wilson had been a project manager for a Chicago construction firm. He'd noticed the young man with obvious intelligence who worked harder than anyone else on the site. He'd invited him for dinner, introduced him to his pregnant wife Rebecca, offered mentorship that had gradually evolved into friendship. When their daughter Lily was born, they'd asked James to be her godfather, the first real connection he'd allowed himself since fleeing New York. Anna watched her brother move around the kitchen, this stranger who wore Michael's face, but carried himself with the careful precision of someone who had spent years practicing a role. "And you never once thought about us, about what we were going through." He stopped pacing and looked at her directly, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I thought about you every day, every single day. I looked you up online when it became possible. I saw your college graduation photos. I knew when Mum died. I was there at the back of the funeral, though I left before anyone could notice me. I've kept track of Dad's condition through public records." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, hesitating before handing it to Anna. Inside were printouts, her college graduation announcement, their mother's obituary, a newspaper clipping about their father receiving a community service award in 2005, before his health began to decline. There was even a grainy photo of Anna receiving her master's degree, clearly taken from the university's website. "You were at Mum's funeral?" Anna whispered, the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. "How could you be there and not say anything?" She remembered that day with painful clarity. The small church filled with mourners, the lilies her mother had always loved adorning the altar, the empty chair they'd left in the front row beside their father, a symbolic place for the son who had never been found. Had Michael seen that chair? Had he understood what it represented? Because by then, I wasn't Michael Mitchell anymore, he said simply. I'd been James Collins longer than I'd ever been Michael. I had friends, a career, a life I'd built carefully from nothing. And the truth is, I was afraid, not just of Brennan and whatever might still happen, but of facing all of you, of explaining why I'd stayed away so long. He described the mental bargains he'd made with himself over the years, that he'd return when he finished college, when he established his career, when enough time had passed, that the danger must surely be gone. But each milestone had come and gone, and the distance had only grown wider, the possibility of reunion more daunting. Anna felt tears streaming down her face, years of grief and anger and confusion culminating in this impossible moment. Officer Brennan died 3 years ago, she said. Heart attack. It was in the neighborhood newsletter. Michael stilled, absorbing this information. I didn't know, he said quietly. Would it have made a difference? Anna asked. Would you have come home then? He didn't answer immediately, and in his hesitation, Anna found a painful truth. Her brother had created a life that no longer had room for his original family. The bonds that had been severed had healed over differently for him than they had for her. I checked the sex offender registry, Michael said suddenly, changing the subject, for the guy who lived across the street from us, Mr. Kaplan. I always thought there was something off about him, the way he watched the neighborhood kids. He's on it now, convicted in 2003 for possession of child pornography. Anna was startled by this revelation. Why would you check that? Because I worried about you, Michael admitted, after I left. I was afraid of what might happen to you without me there to watch out for you. I used to walk you home from school, remember? I kept track of which neighbors seemed suspicious. This was the brother Anna remembered, fiercely protective, always looking out for potential threats. It was both touching and painful to realize he had maintained this vigilance from afar, even as he'd abandoned his role in her life. What happens now? Michael finally asked, returning to the table but not sitting down. Are you going to tell everyone, Dad? Our old friends? The authorities? Anna considered the question, looking around at the home her brother had built, thinking of the connections he had formed, his friendship with Thomas, his role as Lily's godfather. She thought about their father, whose memories were increasingly fragmented, who might not even recognize the son he had lost so long ago. I don't know, she admitted. I came here because I needed to know the truth. I needed to know you were alive, that there was a reason you never came back. She stood, gathering her purse from the chair beside her. I need time to process all of this. Michael nodded, relief and apprehension mingling in his expression. For what it's worth, I am sorry, he said, not for surviving, but for what it cost all of you. As Anna prepared to leave, a new thought struck her. The man in the alley, the one who died, do you remember his name? Rivera, Michael replied without hesitation. Manuel Rivera. Why? Anna's social work career had taught her to look for connections, to recognize the patterns in seemingly isolated incidents. Because if what you saw was real, if his death wasn't really a suicide, then there might be evidence, records, something that could verify your story. For the first time since their reunion, something like hope flickered across Michael's face. You believe me? I believe you're my brother, Anna said carefully. The rest I need to see for myself. They parted with an awkward half-embrace, neither fully comfortable with the physical reminder of their connection. Anna promised to call in a few days, once she'd had time to think. As she drove back to New York, her mind raced with plans and possibilities. If Michael's story was true, there might be a way to clear his name, to bring him back into their family's narrative, not as the missing son, but as the one who had survived against all odds. Back in her apartment, Anna pulled out boxes she'd stored in the back of her closet. The physical remnants of the search for Michael, missing person flyers, newspaper clippings, the journal she'd kept during those first devastating months, documenting every lead, every potential sighting, every dead end. Among these materials was a thick folder containing the police reports from Michael's case, obtained years later through a determined campaign of requests and appeals. She spread these documents across her living room floor, looking for any mention of Manuel Rivera. There was nothing in the official reports. Rivera's death wouldn't have been connected to Michael's disappearance, but there was a note in her journal, dated about 8 months after Michael vanished. Officer B. Mentioned suicide in neighborhood, no connection to Michael. B. Officer Brennan. He had been the one to tell their family about Rivera's death, dismissing it as unrelated to their ongoing search. At the time, Anna had barely registered the information, focused entirely on finding her brother. Now, the coincidence seemed impossible to ignore. The investigation into Manuel Rivera's death became Anna's obsession over the following weeks. She requested police reports through Freedom of Information Act filings, combed through newspaper archives, and eventually tracked down Rivera's widow, now remarried and living in Queens. The process was painstaking. She took personal days from work, spent evenings at the library, scrolling through microfiche of old newspapers, called in favors from contacts in social services to locate Maria Rivera. She found the original report on Rivera's death. Sparse details, a cursory investigation. The case quickly closed as suicide, despite a lack of note or previous attempts. The detective who signed off on the report was a name Anna recognized from her brother's case, Detective Lowell, Brennan's frequent partner. Maria Rivera Gonzalez greeted Anna with cautious hospitality, offering coffee in a sunny kitchen filled with family photos. When Anna carefully explained that she was researching cases similar to her brother's disappearance, Maria's expression darkened. "The police said Manuel killed himself," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "But my husband was not a man who would do such a thing. We had a 3-year-old daughter. He had just been promoted at work. He was happy." She set down her spoon with deliberate precision. "But he had been nervous the week before he died. He said he had seen something, that there was trouble with some officers." The 3-year-old daughter Maria mentioned was now in her 20s, a graduate student studying criminal justice, a career choice directly influenced by the circumstances of her father's death. Maria showed Anna pictures of her daughter, of the family Manuel had never seen grow up, and Anna felt the parallels to her own loss with painful clarity. Anna felt a chill run through her. "Did he mention any names? Officer Brennan, perhaps?" Maria's eyes widened slightly. "How did you know this name?" "Yes, he mentioned a Brennan. He said this man had threatened him, told him no one would believe a Dominican immigrant over a decorated police officer." Maria described the last weeks of her husband's life, his growing paranoia, his insistence on documenting everything, his determination to report the officers despite the risks. He had called a lawyer the day before his death, had made plans to meet with internal affairs. None of these details had appeared in the official report. The pieces were falling into place, confirming the story Michael had told. Anna carefully asked if Maria had kept any records from that time. Notes, letters, anything that might have documented Manuel's concerns. "I have his journal," Maria said after a moment's hesitation. "The police returned his personal effects, but I never read it. It was too painful. It's still in a box somewhere." The box was retrieved from a hall closet, a simple cardboard container holding the last physical traces of Manuel Rivera's existence. His wallet, his watch, a small stack of family photos, and a worn notebook with a blue cover, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Maria handed it to Anna with trembling hands. "I could never bring myself to read it," she admitted. "But perhaps now is the time. Perhaps it can finally serve some purpose." The journal, when they read it together at Maria's kitchen table, contained exactly what Anna had hoped for. Detailed entries describing the beating Manuel had witnessed, the threats from Officer Brennan, and even a mention of a teenage boy who saw everything and tried to help me. The final entry, dated the day before his death, expressed fear, but also determination to formally report the incident to Internal Affairs the following morning. Manuel had documented everything meticulously: dates, times, badge numbers, precise descriptions of the officers involved, and the man they had been beating, a local drug dealer who had apparently refused to pay protection money. He had even noted the make and color of Michael's backpack, the logo on his baseball cap, details no one could have invented. As they read the final pages, Maria wept quietly. "All these years," she said, "I knew he didn't take his own life. I knew something wasn't right, but no one would listen." Armed with this evidence, Anna contacted a journalist friend who specialized in cases of police misconduct. Together they built a case that couldn't be ignored. The journal entries, testimony from Maria, records showing that Officer Brennan and his partner had been subject to multiple civilian complaints over the years, none of which had resulted in disciplinary action. They discovered that Brennan had been investigated internally twice, once for excessive force and once for evidence tampering, but had been cleared both times. They found 3 other cases similar to Rivera's, apparent suicides of witnesses to police misconduct, all closed quickly with minimal investigation. They located retired officers willing to speak anonymously about the protected status Brennan had enjoyed due to his connections within the department. The story that emerged was one of systematic corruption centered around a small group of officers who had operated with impunity for years, protected by a network of colleagues, supervisors, and family members within the system. Michael had been just one of many who had seen too much and paid the price. When the story finally broke in the press, it created exactly the kind of shield Michael needed to reclaim his identity. The narrative was compelling. A teenage witness forced into hiding after observing police brutality, a subsequent cover-up, and the suspicious death of the victim. Public sympathy was overwhelmingly on Michael's side, with many questioning how the system had failed both him and the Rivera family so completely. The department opened an investigation into the historical cases, promising a thorough review and appropriate action. The district attorney's office established a special task force to examine all cases involving Officer Brennan and his associates. Politicians made speeches about police accountability and witness protection. For Michael, the vindication came too late to restore what he had lost, but it offered something he hadn't expected, a chance to reconnect with his past without fear. With Anna's help, he began the process of legally reclaiming his identity, of explaining his absence to old friends, of rebuilding bridges that had seemed permanently burned. 3 months after their reunion at his home in Boston, Michael finally agreed to meet their father. The care facility's visiting room was quiet that afternoon, sunlight streaming through large windows onto the institutional furniture. Anna waited anxiously as a nurse brought their father in, his steps slower than they once were, his once imposing frame now stooped and thin. Their father had good days and bad days now. On good days, he remembered Anna, could recall details of his construction business, knew that his wife had passed away. On bad days, he confused Anna with her mother, asked repeatedly about getting home to feed the dog they'd had when the children were small, grew agitated when the world didn't align with his fractured memories. "Dad," Anna said gently, taking his hand, "I've brought someone to see you, someone special." Their father looked up, his gaze drifting past Anna to where Michael stood, uncertainty written across his face. For a terrible moment, Anna feared her father was having one of his bad days, that he wouldn't recognize either of them. But then his eyes widened, clarity breaking through the fog of his condition. "Michael," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "My boy?" Michael stepped forward, kneeling beside their father's chair. "It's me, Dad," he said, taking his father's other hand. "I'm home." Their father reached out with trembling fingers to touch Michael's face, tracing the features that had changed, yet remained fundamentally the same. "I knew you'd come back," he said, with the simple certainty of a parent's faith. "I kept telling them. My boy wouldn't leave without a reason. My boy would find his way home." He didn't ask where Michael had been or why he had stayed away so long. Perhaps his condition made such complex explanations unnecessary, or perhaps the joy of reunion transcended the need for explanations. He simply held his son's hand, occasionally reaching out to touch his shoulder or face as though reassuring himself that Michael was really there. Michael told him stories of his life as an architect, showing him pictures of buildings he had helped design. Their father, who had spent his life in construction, asked surprisingly lucid questions about structural elements and materials. He told Michael about projects he'd completed before his retirement, buildings that still stood as testaments to his craftsmanship. As Anna watched her brother and father embrace years of separation dissolving in the recognition of blood and memory, she understood that healing would not be simple or complete. Michael, who still answered to James more naturally than his birth name, would likely never move back to New York or fully reintegrate into the life he had left behind. Their family had been irreversibly altered by his absence, just as he had been transformed by his years living as someone else. But as the afternoon light waned and the three of them shared stories, Michael carefully selecting memories his father could still access, their father occasionally confusing past and present, but never losing the thread of joy at his son's return, Anna felt the first true sense of peace she had known since that spring evening in 1996. Their father grew tired as the visit stretched into its third hour, his attention drifting and his words becoming less coherent. The nurse gently suggested they return another day. As they prepared to leave, their father grasped Michael's wrist with surprising strength. "Your mother would be so happy," he said, his eyes suddenly clear and focused. "She never gave up on you. Not for one day." In the hallway outside, Michael leaned against the wall, overcome with emotion. "He still knows me," he said, his voice thick. "After everything, he still knows who I am." "He never forgot you," Anna replied. "None of us did." The truth, it turned out, had been both simpler and more complex than any of the scenarios she had imagined during those long years of searching. There had been no abduction, no amnesia, no deliberate cruelty in Michael's disappearance. Just a young man caught in circumstances beyond his control, making the best decisions he could with limited options and overwhelming fear. The weeks that followed brought a flurry of activity. The story of Michael's return and the corruption that had driven him into hiding made national headlines. Other victims of Officer Brennan and his associates came forward with their own stories. The department's internal investigation expanded, leading to the resignation of several high-ranking officials who had helped cover up misconduct. Manuel Rivera's case was officially reopened and reclassified as a suspicious death rather than a suicide. Forensic experts reviewed the original evidence, finding inconsistencies that should have raised red flags. Gunshot residue patterns inconsistent with self-infliction, missing fingerprints on the weapon, signs of a struggle in the apartment that had been overlooked or deliberately ignored. For Maria Rivera Gonzalez, the validation brought both relief and renewed grief. "I always knew," she told Anna when they met again to discuss the investigation's progress. "A mother knows these things, just as your mother must have known your brother was still out there somewhere." The comparison struck Anna deeply. Her mother had indeed maintained a stubborn belief that Michael was alive, even as the years passed without a trace. She had kept a suitcase packed in her closet, ready for the moment she might need to travel to wherever her son had been found. She had consulted psychics, followed up on reported sightings in distant cities, maintained a detailed file of every lead, no matter how tenuous. That certainty, which Anna had sometimes viewed as denial, now seemed like a mother's intuition, a connection that transcended physical separation. In the months that followed, Michael split his time between his established life in Boston and reconnecting with the fragments of his past in New York. He legally reclaimed his birth name while maintaining his professional identity as James Collins. The journalist who had helped break the story wrote a book about the case, shining a light on the systemic failures that had allowed Officer Brennan's misconduct to go unchecked for so many years. Reconnecting with his old life wasn't always easy. Some friends embraced him immediately, overjoyed at his miraculous return. Others were more hesitant, hurt by what they perceived as abandonment, struggling to understand why he hadn't trusted them with the truth. His high school girlfriend, now married with 3 children, broke down in tears when they met for coffee, admitting she had spent years blaming herself, wondering if something she'd done had driven him away. The most difficult meeting was with Chris and Danny, the friends he had been on his way to meet the night he disappeared. Both had been questioned repeatedly by police in the days following Michael's disappearance, their statements scrutinized for inconsistencies, their lives disrupted by suspicion. "They treated us like criminals," Danny told Michael when they finally reconnected at a bar in their old neighborhood. "Like we'd done something to you." Chris's dad lost a job contract because someone spread rumors that his son was involved in a possible homicide. "We looked for you for months," Chris added, his voice tight with old anger. "Put up posters, talked to everyone we knew, organized search parties. And all that time, you were just gone, by choice." Michael struggled to explain the fear that had driven him, the threats that had seemed so real to his 17-year-old self. "I thought I was protecting you too," he said. "If they were willing to kill Rivera to keep him quiet, what might they have done to anyone who helped me?" Gradually, as the full story emerged through the ongoing investigation, understanding replaced resentment. The depth of corruption that had been uncovered made Michael's fear seem not only reasonable, but prescient. The friends began to rebuild their connection, finding common ground in their shared history and the adults they had become. Manuel Rivera received a form of posthumous justice when the department reopened the investigation into his death, eventually reclassifying it as suspicious rather than suicide. His widow, and now adult daughter, found some measure of closure in finally having their long-held suspicions validated. The daughter, Elena Rivera, had grown up with the shadow of her father's alleged suicide hanging over her. The stigma had followed her through school, had shaped her understanding of her own family history. Learning the truth, that her father had been brave, had tried to stand up against corruption, had been planning to formally report what he had witnessed, transformed her relationship with his memory. "All my life, I've been the daughter of a man who gave up," she told Michael when they met at a community forum on police reform. "Now I know I'm the daughter of a man who refused to back down, even when it cost him everything." For Anna, the greatest change was internal. The hollow space that had defined her adult life was filled not with the brother she had lost, but with the complicated man he had become. They were building a new relationship, one that acknowledged both their shared past and the separate paths they had traveled. Some days were easier than others. There were moments of natural connection. A shared laugh over a childhood memory, the discovery that they both still fidgeted with napkins in restaurants just as their mother had done, the way they could communicate volumes with just a raised eyebrow, a family trait. There were also moments of painful disconnect, references Michael didn't understand, experiences he hadn't shared, the realization that they had become fundamentally different people in ways that could never be undone. "Do you ever regret it?" Anna asked him once, as they sorted through boxes of family photographs in their father's storage unit. "Staying away so long? Creating a whole different life?" Michael considered the question carefully, holding a picture of their family at the beach the summer before he disappeared. "I regret the pain it caused," he said finally. "I regret missing Mom's last years and not being there for you. But the life I built," he shook his head, "I can't regret that. It's real. It's mine. I worked hard for it." Anna understood, though the understanding brought its own kind of sadness. The brother she had mourned for 19 years could never truly come back, because he had grown into someone else. The best they could hope for was to create something new from the fragments of what had been lost. On the anniversary of their reunion, Michael invited Anna to Boston to meet the people who had become his chosen family. Thomas and Rebecca Wilson welcomed her warmly, filling in the blanks of the years she had missed. They showed her photographs of Michael, James to them, graduating from college, helping build their back deck, holding baby Lily for the first time. He saved our marriage, Rebecca confided to Anna over dinner. Thomas was working 70-hour weeks. We were fighting constantly. I was struggling with postpartum depression after Lily was born. James, Michael, stepped in, watched the baby so I could sleep, convinced Thomas to cut back his hours, just held us together when we were falling apart. He never talked about his past, Thomas admitted quietly as they watched Michael and Rebecca arranging dinner in the kitchen. But there was always something in his eyes when holidays came around, a kind of sadness we couldn't touch. Now I understand why. Lily, now adjusting to her first year of graduate school, had absorbed the revelation about her godfather's true identity with the resilience of youth. "It's like finding out he's secretly a superhero or something," she told Anna with a grin. "Like he had this whole origin story we didn't know about." That evening, as they gathered around the Wilsons' dining table, Anna observed her brother in this environment where he was most comfortable. He laughed easily with Thomas, teased Lily about her college boyfriend, moved through their home with the familiarity of someone who belonged. He was both the Michael she remembered and the James he had become, a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed irrevocably separated. Later, as they stood on the Wilsons' back porch, watching fireflies rise from the summer grass, Michael turned to Anna with an expression of tentative hope. "Do you think there's a way forward from here?" he asked. "Some path where all of this makes sense?" Anna thought about their father, whose moments of lucidity were becoming rarer, but who smiled with genuine joy whenever Michael visited. She thought about their mother, who had died never knowing her son's fate, but who would have understood, Anna believed, the impossible choices he had faced. She thought about the 19 years of searching that had defined her own life, and how that search had shaped her into someone stronger and more resilient than she might otherwise have been. She thought about the Rivera family, finding a measure of peace in finally knowing the truth about Manuel's death, about the other victims of Brennan's corruption who had come forward, emboldened by Michael's story, about the changes in departmental policy that were being implemented as a result of the investigation, better witness protection, stronger oversight, more transparent disciplinary procedures. "I think we're already on it," she said, reaching for her brother's hand in the gathering darkness. "The path forward, it doesn't erase what happened, but it gives it meaning." The following spring, they gathered at their father's care facility to celebrate his 75th birthday. His condition had deteriorated significantly, and he recognized them only intermittently now, but the doctors had suggested that familiar faces and routines could still provide comfort even when conscious recognition failed. Michael had flown in from Boston, bringing Thomas and Rebecca with him. Anna had invited Chris and Danny, along with a few of their father's old friends from the construction business. They set up decorations in the facility's community room, brought a cake from their father's favorite bakery in Brooklyn, created a slideshow of family photographs that played on a loop. Their father drifted in and out of awareness throughout the party, sometimes engaging animatedly with guests, sometimes retreating into confused silence. During one lucid moment, he motioned Michael closer to his wheelchair. "Your mother was right," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "She always said you'd come back when it was safe, made me promise not to sell the house until you did." Michael glanced at Anna, startled. This was the first they'd heard of such a conversation. Their mother had indeed refused to sell the family home, despite the financial strain of maintaining it after their father's illness forced his early retirement. Anna had assumed it was simply another manifestation of her unwillingness to let go of hope. "When did she say that?" Michael asked gently. Their father's brow furrowed with the effort of recollection. "After the detective came, the one asking about the Rivera case again, years after you left. She said it meant you were in danger, that you must have witnessed something. She made me promise." His eyes drifted closed, the moment of clarity passing as quickly as it had come. Later, as they were cleaning up after the party, Michael turned to Anna. "Do you think it's true that Mom somehow figured it out?" Anna remembered her mother's meticulous files, the way she had documented every development in Michael's case, how she had maintained contact with detectives long after the official investigation had gone cold. "I think she was smarter than we gave her credit for," she said, "and I think she never stopped fighting for you in her own way." The discovery added another layer to their understanding of the past, suggesting that perhaps they hadn't been as alone in their separate struggles as they had believed. Their mother, in her quiet persistence, had held a piece of the truth neither of them had fully grasped. In July, the district attorney's office announced formal charges against 3 former police officers who had worked closely with Brennan, based on evidence uncovered during the expanded investigation. The charges included evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy related to Rivera's death and several other cases. While Brennan himself had escaped accountability through death, his accomplices would face legal consequences for their actions. Michael and Anna attended the press conference together, standing at the back of the room as the district attorney detailed the charges. Reporters who recognized them asked for comments afterward, but they declined, preferring to let the official proceedings speak for themselves. "Does it help?" Anna asked as they walked away from the courthouse. "Seeing them face charges after all this time?" Michael considered the question, his pace slowing. "It doesn't undo anything," he said finally. "It doesn't give me back those years or bring Rivera back to his family. But yes, it helps to know the truth didn't stay buried forever. That there are consequences, even if they're delayed." That evening, they visited their old neighborhood in Brooklyn, walking past the brownstone where they had grown up, now renovated and occupied by a young family, with children's bicycles chained to the front railing. They passed the basketball courts, where Michael had been heading the night he disappeared, the corner store where they had bought candy with their allowance money, the church where their mother's funeral had been held. "It's smaller than I remember," Michael observed, as they completed their circuit of familiar landmarks. "The whole neighborhood." "That's what happens when you grow up," Anna replied, linking her arm through his. "Everything gets smaller, except the memories." They had dinner at a new restaurant that had opened in what used to be a hardware store, discussing their father's care, Anna's work, Michael's latest architectural project. Normal sibling conversations that still felt surreal, given the circumstances that had separated them for so long. "I'm thinking of moving back part-time," Michael said as they waited for dessert. "Not to Brooklyn, but maybe Manhattan or Queens. Split my time between here and Boston. The firm is opening a New York office, and they've asked if I'd be interested in helping set it up." Anna tried to contain her surprise and delight, not wanting to pressure him. "That would be really good," she said carefully, "if it's what you want." "I think it is," Michael replied, his expression thoughtful. "For a long time, New York represented everything I was running from. Now it feels like there might be something to come back for." The decision wasn't made lightly. Michael spent months discussing the possibility with the Wilsons, with his therapist, whom he had finally started seeing to process the complex trauma of his past, and with Anna. He worried about dividing his life between 2 cities, about maintaining the connections he had built in Boston while rebuilding relationships in New York, about the practical and emotional complications of straddling his dual identities. But by the following spring, he had secured an apartment in Long Island City and begun spending every other week in New York. He joined Anna for regular visits to their father, whose health was steadily declining. He reconnected with extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, who had mourned his loss and now celebrated his return with varying degrees of understanding and acceptance. He even began volunteering with the same missing persons organization, where Anna had spent so many hours over the years, offering a unique perspective to families going through their own nightmare of uncertainty. His story, now widely known through media coverage and the book documenting the case, offered a rare example of hope, of a positive outcome after years of apparent tragedy. On the anniversary of their reunion, Michael invited Anna to Boston to meet the people who had become his chosen family, Thomas and Rebecca Wilson welcomed her warmly, filling in the blanks of the years she had missed. They showed her photographs of Michael, James to them, graduating from college, helping build their back deck, holding baby Lily for the first time. He never talked about his past, Thomas admitted quietly, as they watched Michael and Rebecca arranging dinner in the kitchen. But there was always something in his eyes when holidays came around, a kind of sadness we couldn't touch. Now I understand why. That evening, as they gathered around the Wilsons' dining table, Anna observed her brother in this environment where he was most comfortable. He laughed easily with Thomas, teased Lily about her college boyfriend, moved through their home with the familiarity of someone who belonged. He was both the Michael she remembered and the James he had become, a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed irrevocably separated. Later, as they stood on the Wilsons' back porch watching fireflies rise from the summer grass, Michael turned to Anna with an expression of tentative hope. "Do you think there's a way forward from here?" he asked. "Some path where all of this makes sense?" Anna thought about their father, whose moments of lucidity were becoming rarer, but who smiled with genuine joy whenever Michael visited. She thought about their mother, who had died never knowing her son's fate, but who would have understood, Anna believed, the impossible choices he had faced. She thought about the 19 years of searching that had defined her own life, and how that search had shaped her into someone stronger and more resilient than she might otherwise have been. "I think we're already on it," she said, reaching for her brother's hand in the gathering darkness. "The path forward. It doesn't erase what happened, but it gives it meaning." Michael squeezed her hand, the gesture an echo of childhood reassurances exchanged long ago. Above them, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, each a distant point of light in a vast universe of possibilities, much like the moment of recognition that had changed everything at an ordinary graduation ceremony, proving that sometimes what is lost can be found again, though never in quite the way we expect. Their story would never be a simple tale of loss and recovery. It was messier, more complicated, filled with unanswerable questions and imperfect resolutions. But as they stood together in the gentle spring evening, Anna understood that this complexity was precisely what made their reconnection real, rather than the fairy tale reunion she had imagined during those long years of searching. The brother she had lost had returned, not as the person he might have been had he never left, but as someone shaped by difficult choices and hard-won survival. The sister he had left behind had grown into a woman defined not just by loss, but by resilience, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to finding the truth. Together, they were learning to navigate this new terrain of their shared history, acknowledging the pain of the past while creating space for a future neither of them had dared to imagine. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and in that reality they were finding something that had seemed impossible for nearly 2 decades, the chance to be family again, on new terms, with eyes wide open to both the cost of what had been lost and the value of what remained.